Hello, and welcome back to Campus Conversations, the brand new podcast series brought to you by the Alabama Independent School Association. I'm your host, Michael Shipma, Marketing and Communications Director here at AISA. Every week, we're diving into what it means to be a part of the AISA, the unique services we provide that help schools and educators grow, and even some new and innovative ways that these non-public schools can better serve their respective communities. Each week, I'll be talking to experts dealing in areas of academics, accreditation, and athletics with helpful tips and anecdotes about how schools and their teachers can maximize their efforts in the classroom and grow as an institution. I'm thrilled to be talking about these services and how they're benefiting the more than 90 member schools and counting across the entire state of Alabama, covering more than 28,000 students. So join us for new episodes every Friday wherever you get your podcasts. And today, we're talking with a couple professors at the University of Alabama who are helping their fellow instructors integrate artificial intelligence into their classrooms. That's right, folks, we're talking about AI today. I'm so excited, so let's get right to it. This is Campus Conversations. When teachers and heads of school hear those two little letters, AI, we at AISA have heard a number of different reactions ranging from total opposition to it, to fully embracing it, and pretty much everything in between. No doubt, AI is a powerful tool and only seems to be getting stronger, faster, and more accurate by the day. For teachers, the use of AI among their students presents yet another challenge, and it's up to those teachers and their heads of school to determine how they want to handle AI and what their classroom policies should look like. Many colleges and universities are already looking at ways to navigate the use of artificial intelligence, and that includes the University of Alabama. At UA, a group of professors have been tasked with forging a path for their colleagues to not fight back against AI, but instead to find a way to maybe integrate it. It's called the Artificial Intelligence Teaching Enhancement Initiative. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but you know what? They're doing great work. And joining us to talk more about this are two of the professors who are heading this whole thing up. We have with us Dr. Lawrence Capello. He's an associate professor in the Department of History and director of the UA Legal History Concentration. Also with us is Dr. Catherine Chu, an assistant professor and archaeologist in Alabama's Department of Anthropology. So thank you to both of you for joining us on this podcast today. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Glad to be here.
Let's start here. So I have to admit, I was doing some research for this episode, and I was looking at both of your titles. Both of you are very accomplished. It's very clear, but I couldn't help see, or I should say, not see anything that said artificial intelligence in your degrees or your titles or anything like that. It might not be obvious that you guys are, really kind of, you know your stuff when it comes to AI. So talk a little bit about this initiative, what you guys are hoping to accomplish, and I do want to hear from both of you, but let's start with you, Dr. Capello, kind of the goal of this initiative.
Sure. So let me start with our backgrounds. So I'm a legal and constitutional historian. I teach legal and constitutional history, but my area of expertise is the right to privacy. And Dr. Chu, also being an archaeologist, she's a former national ethics bowl champion. So both of us have data heavy backgrounds in our research. That just doesn't seem like it in our titles. And both of us have been thinking a lot about things like privacy and ethics and technology for a long time. So when AI hit and we were starting to found the AI Teaching Enhancement Initiative, we both started not really from a place of like techno optimism. We both started as kind of extreme skeptics with backgrounds in, studying ethical problems and privacy problems with technology. So that was kind of our background. We started, from a somewhat skeptical, almost negative space, and also I think a fearful space, which a lot of us were really afraid when we first saw this technology. And then from there, kind of became converts and, really fell in love with AI and its potential, but have never moved away from that raw skepticism. It's part of, everything that we do when we look at this stuff. There needs to be balance. As far as how we got started, Dr. Chu and I are both teachers, and we both won the same teaching award the same year. And while we were there, this was the end of 2021. And we were in these rooms filled with like former award-winning winners. These are like rock star professors, people who are really popular and never had a problem connecting with their students. And this is when things had just started opening up after the pandemic. And suddenly you had these teachers that never had a problem connecting with students because post-pandemic student disengagement, it's a real thing. It's a nationwide phenomenon. And for some reason, students were just really struggling in the classroom to get that old kind of energy back. So we opened up a lot of conversations even before ChatGPT dropped about how to go about getting the classroom to be more dynamic again. Is there a unique challenge that we have to face with these students? Then when the whole world started seeing what ChatGPT could do, we started bumping into educators both online and in person who were like, hey, AI is actually a tremendous teaching tool if you start looking into it. And we did, extremely. And after kind of burying our heads for a year, just studying how AI is being used as teaching tools and, going across the SEC and talking to other faculty from other universities about how they were doing it, we founded the UA Teaching Enhancement Initiative. And now we run workshops for faculty across the university, teaching them how to go from basically no AI usage to integrating into their classrooms to make it, more dynamic, more engaging, and just get back some of that stuff that we lost as educators during the pandemic.
Mhm. And Dr. Chu, I do want to hear from you as well on this. Like Dr. Capello said, so many different thoughts and opinions come up around AI. So many, you mentioned earlier, Dr. Capello, about, not really being too excited about the prospect of AI. Now it seems like a lot of opinions maybe are starting to shift, maybe soften up a little bit. Talk a little bit about how this initiative is working so far and how the University of Alabama is instructing its teachers to use AI in its instruction, should they choose.
So just to add on to the amazing description that Lawrence has given about our origin story, I would say again, I want to emphasize to the listeners of this podcast that we are first and foremost educators, in addition to being researchers and the many other hats that we wear. And so, like Lawrence said, like this definitely initiated out of a place of fear, fear of displacement, fear of uncertainty about what the future holds, fear about what the meaning of learning is going to be in this new world that we're all walking into. And we are undergoing very vast, I would say, technological change at a very rapid rate. And it's a little bit difficult to process. So I think the benefit of, sort of our experience has been that we're able to connect with faculty who I think are feeling very much the same way in terms of a reticence to adopt this technology that seems like it's going to basically get rid of what learning is. And we would say that that's not necessarily the case. While there are certain threats, and I think we have to be realistic and see that there definitely are issues that we have to work around, particularly ethical and privacy issues. But there's also a lot of opportunity. And so in our sort of journey so far, and now it's been a little bit over 2 years of not only getting to know some partner institutions in the Southeastern Conference, but also some of the institutions here in Alabama, including community colleges, HBCUs. We've also spread out to other states too, and just having conversations with faculty administrators across the spectrum. We've learned that, while there are, again, things to worry about, there is the potential to kind of grab this thing by the horns and transform what education means, to revitalize it in a way that I think many of us have wanted to ever since the pandemic. And I mean, we can talk endlessly about some of the post-pandemic learning loss and some of the skills gaps that we're seeing right now. But I think for the most part, we're all kind of dealing with widespread disengagement, with students coming in and feeling like learning isn't necessarily as fun as it should be, or that there's really no point because they don't know what the future holds. They don't think they're going to get a job, et cetera, et cetera. And so what Lawrence and I have done in terms of probing the use cases of AI is to see ways in which it can really enliven the classroom. I think all of us who are educators have to realize that the assessments and the techniques we used to use prior to the advent of generative AI no longer may be wholly appropriate. We need to do a whole scale revision of our techniques to see, okay, is an essay really going to be appropriate to achieve certain learning outcomes in this particular environment? When should we introduce certain tools and techniques that maybe should be restricted expected at lower levels. So thinking about issues like scaffolding. And so what we've done with our workshops is not only like are we sharing certain techniques and getting faculty used to the idea of AI or to even understand what AI is in many cases, but also to engage people in larger conversations about what AI can do, right? So bring people together, have them think creatively about certain applications of AI, have them share with one another, have them rediscover the joy of teaching. And I do also want to emphasize that, like, you know, it's been hard to be a teacher, I think, in the last few years. I think across the spectrum, whether that's K to 12 or higher ed, there's been a lot of demands. And I think the landscape of education is changing in this country as well. And I would say, like, a lot of my peers, just speaking for my own department, definitely felt overtaxed, overburdened. And then with AI coming in as well, just we're like, what's the point at this point? Like, just what's the next thing that's going to happen, right? It's just a dumpster fire at this moment. And what we've seen with AI in these workshops is really a rediscovery of the love of teaching, if that makes sense. It's almost beautiful in a way. It kind of makes me a little bit emotional. But you see people smiling, you see people talking to each other, you see people sharing techniques. And because AI impacts everybody, not only just within education, but I would say across the board, across disciplines, like suddenly, like everybody is at the same place in terms of level. And I think once we all acknowledge that we're all feeling a little bit insecure about this and we deal with the psychological impacts of this technology, I find that a lot of people feel more open to share. And it's been a truly wonderful experience.
Well, and I know that one of the big things about just teaching on a day-to-day basis can be its own challenge. There's so much that a teacher has to get done through the day, and sometimes it may not feel like there's enough hours to accomplish everything that you want to accomplish. And AI, of course, can be that tool that can potentially take something that might take you hours and accomplish it in just, the matter of seconds, which is incredible to think about. But when you look at this technology and you hear so many different things like, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Copilot on our computers, Apple rolling out its AI. I mean, there's so many different AI platforms and they all kind of have their own different kind of branding and what they do. But I guess, practically speaking, if I were a teacher in the classroom, what sorts of, uses do you all see as being the most as the best fit to hand over to AI as opposed to keeping it just in the hands of the teacher. I would love to hear from both of you about this. What's worked, and perhaps what might not be a good idea to use AI for.
Yeah, sure. Someone who's teaching biochemistry is going to need it for different reasons than someone who's teaching like English literature versus someone who's teaching like political science, right? It's so when we teach faculty about AI, we do it in three-part workshops. The first part is just the lectures, and it's how to make your lectures more dynamic, tools that would work kind of across disciplines. One thing, for example, is one of the ways that you can help students really retain information is by taking the kind of main thing you're trying to teach them every class and find a way to make it into like a story, like whether it's a fictional story or a real story or something you can relate to real life. AI is really good at doing that for you. What you can do is, prompt the AI, say, I'm looking for 3 to 5 different allegories or metaphors or fictional stories to better explain this concept that I'm teaching. Now, I could sit there in front of a blank screen and try to figure out 5 different options that might take me an hour or two. Whereas if you pop that question into AI with the learning goal you're trying to teach, you'll get 5 kind of interesting answers. None of them are going to be perfect. You're still going to have to lean on your own expertise. But, as that works, you can tweak and suddenly have something in a shorter period of time than you would have before. Like you just said, it's best viewed as the best teaching assistant you've ever had in the world. And it's also not the death of expertise. If you just plugged in the answers that AI gave you for that thing that I said, they wouldn't be really good. They wouldn't hit with your students. You still have to be the expert in the field to know how to make these adjustments. But man, it can get you from 0 to 70% of the way there pretty quickly. And then you can be the one to fill in the gaps. I teach constitutional law. One thing that I do is I created a chatbot that serves kind of as a role-playing prosecutor that will mimic things like jury selection. So instead of just explaining how jury selection works to a class, I can queue up the AI on a big screen and have the AI straight up interrogate or, go through the jury selection process with students in the classroom, which is going to be a much more memorable experience. The second thing that we really focus on is images and how to use different types of AI tools to generate images to make your class a little more visually stimulating, whether that's through video or whether that's just through rapid fire visuals to help your narrative along. Kind of like if you were watching a documentary on TV, you can really drill down and create images that can blow students' minds, particularly if you're trying to teach them about something that happened more than a couple of hundred years ago, where there are no photographs, where it's just, drawings and sketching, taking Galileo or Genghis Khan or, an ancient civilization and bringing them to life in some hyper photorealistic thing. That's pretty cool. And the next thing that we focus on is just assessments, how to either use AI in your assignments and encourage student use of AI in their assignments within reason, or also how to AI proof your assignments. We're big believers that there's a lot of instances where AI has absolutely no place in the classroom, that you still need to make sure that students are developing like old school critical thinking skills, that they're using their own brains to solve their own problems. But we're also at this point where if you have a college degree, employers are going to expect you to be somewhat conversant with these tools. They don't need you to have a degree in machine learning, but regardless of what your major is, whether it's humanities or social sciences or STEM, if you're graduating with a bachelor's degree from a flagship university like the University of Alabama, an employer is going to expect you to have some exposure to these tools. Someone who's 45, who's hiring a 23-year-old, isn't going to expect you to be the AI wizard, but they're going to want to know that you've used AI to solve certain problems. So, we, as educators, we also have a certain duty to make sure that we're exposing students to these tools, but how to do that appropriately is going to be up to the instructor.
Well, and that's an interesting that you brought that up because as we talk to a lot of our member schools, our member institutions, the heads of school and their teachers, a lot of them say to us, I just don't know how to get a handle on this. I don't know how to use it. And it can be very daunting. So I guess Dr. Chu, let's talk a little bit about how, AI and tech in general just they're constantly changing and it's a lot to keep up with. But these schools, I guess, tell me what your best advice would be here as far as these schools trying to stay ahead of the game when it comes to their policies, when it comes to, understanding what's going on in the world around us. What advice can you give to some of these teachers and heads of school to kind of, I guess, keep their heads above water a little bit when it comes to AI and how to use it and perhaps how not to use it?
Yeah, well, first I want to address the feeling of like not knowing exactly what to do or what the best course of direction is. I think everyone to a certain extent is in a similar boat, and that was one takeaway message we got from speaking with all different kinds of institutions. I mean, mostly higher ed, but also some K to 12, speaking to administrators and also faculty on the ground. And granted, we do want to also recognize that there's a vast difference in terms of the resources that different institutions have access to in terms of expertise and then also financial resources for some of these many tools that we've talked about. So the good news, though, is that nobody has the exact answers as to what to do. I think even industry, when we talk to industry partners, they don't know necessarily what kind of competencies they're looking for. All they know is that AI is a hot thing. AI has so much potential, and they want graduates to come in to advise them on how to use AI, often in a compliant manner, but also in what ways it can make their processes more efficient and streamline everything that they do. So right now, it's a conversation, I would say, between a lot of different kinds of stakeholders, and of course, education being one of them, because we're the ones expected to prepare our students for a future workforce. So in terms of what we found is helpful so far in terms of getting either reticent people on board, and we recognize there is a rationale for being reluctant to try these technologies, but also people that may not know where to start, is really just to walk in with an open mind and to play. A lot of these tools are rather intuitive and don't require a whole amount of expertise to get started. I think in part that's what is scaring people, is that with a little bit of time investment, some of the things traditionally that you would have required a lot of training for you can now do in a very small amount of time. Like coding, for example, AI is actually really, really good at coding to the point where like there are companies now that are getting rid of some of their coders, unfortunately. So definitely having an environment where like you can get people together to at least experiment, to at least understand what AI is. And for those who don't want to integrate AI, I think to do that, though, you have to understand, like, know thy enemy, right? Understand what the tool is, what it's doing, and then build around it. So, getting people together is definitely first and foremost what we probably recommend. And then offering some assistance as well with access to tools. And like you've mentioned, Michael, I mean, right now, like, we don't know who's going to reign supreme. It is kind of the Wild West out there right now in terms of AI development, and around the world is a bit of an arms race too. So I would say though that the principles are rather similar from tool to tool. So just even having access to one of them, whether that's Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, just to get people to understand now what these large language learning models are basically able to do. And some of it is really amazing, and some of it is kind of will make people feel better because I think it's very clear where that expertise is still needed.
Yeah, I think you also have to just be very straightforward and keep it real with faculty. Like if you're talking to them about how this is going to work, first off, I think we've been successful at UA because we don't come across as AI,
Evangelists.
evangelists, right? Like we're sitting there, we're like, hey, this is a really problematic technology. Off the bat, we're like, this is a huge problem. There are times where you shouldn't use it. And people are like, oh, okay. Like, we're not sitting there being like, this is the best thing ever. We also, as we researched more and more about AI at the early stages when we were just starting this initiative, we learned very quickly that this isn't the depth of expertise. Like there's the expression in the field, AI is not going to take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. And I think that that's a way that you can explain that to educators as well. Go play with it. It is not good enough to do everything that you do. It can make you a super version of you. It can make you a lot more productive. It can make your research and your classes a lot better. But skepticism is a very appropriate reaction. And I think starting from that point when talking to faculty is kind of crucial. And then also demystifying it is great. This is a lot easier to learn than it was for 2 generations ago when professors had to go from like filing cabinets to learning like Excel and Word. And like back in the day when people used to put the term computer literate on their resumes, right? Where like that was something like, I know how to use Word was like a thing that you would brag about like in, 1991. Whereas that was harder for that generation of professionals than it is for this generation to learn AI. AI is very intuitive. You just need the right instructor to kind of get you started, to kind of teach you how to talk to it, to give you a heads up about what it's, capable of doing. And then also teaching people that like, if you have a question, you can ask the AI. Like it's good to ask other people as well, but this is a lot easier. And when you can just take 20 minutes, put people in front of computers together, educators, in a room, sitting in front of laptops, sitting in front of terminals, giving them a couple of introductory prompts to play with, and suddenly they're like, "Oh wow, this is really cool." Or if this is garbage, garbage is a good thing sometimes, where you're like, "Oh, this isn't nearly as good as I thought it was." Of course, I'm still necessary. So I think that just being honest and coming from a position of skepticism, not one of like a fake hyper optimism, which I think everybody is turned off by and no one's really into. We all learned in the early 2000s when the internet just started that like 100% optimism wasn't the move, right? Like we all now know that things like social media and the internet in general came with a lot of downsides. Some of which, got passed on to kids and we're all terrified about that. So I think just starting from a period of, hey, we should all be a little bit scared about this and a little bit sad about this, but it's also pretty amazing. And like, we should, do all of those things together.
No, that's really good advice. And I know that this will be very, I really do hope that and believe that this will be good advice for teachers. And I think understanding what it is you're using, I think, and then actually sitting down, like you said, Lawrence, and just sitting down in front of a computer, playing with it, I think will help a lot of folks feel a little bit better about it. So I really do appreciate that advice. And I guess real quick, Dr. Chu, when you look at where this initiative began at UA back in June of 2023, you all took a survey of, it was, I believe it was over 100 faculty members who said that they had used AI in their teaching. That number was 14% back in June 2023. Any idea where that number stands now, a little bit over a year later?
Yes, we have some data from June 2024 for so a few months ago. Basically, the same survey went out, and it looks like we got a slight uptick in various disciplines. So definitely, we've gotten a little bit. We had a higher rate of adoption in humanities and fine arts, which lagged behind all the other fields. A little bit higher in social sciences and natural science as well. Overall, I think we're looking at around 20% adoption at the moment, which is a little bit higher than 14, about a little bit over 40% increase. But the kind of worrying thing I think that is motivating us to keep this going is that recent data that's come out nationally about student adoption rates show that over 50% of students are using it, right? So the assumption now for many of us is that you can try to think about ways to prevent students from using AI, but the reality is many of them probably are going to be using it, whether you allow it or disallow it in your classroom. So we're trying to also encourage faculty to just understand, like, hey, you have to acknowledge its existence and you have to design around it, whether that's going really old school with things like in-class written exams and lockdown browsers, or assignments and assessments and material that basically integrates AI in various ways. Right. So if you're integrating it into writing, maybe you want them to include an AI chat log with their submission, or you want to break it down into more discrete tasks, right, that they can then show their work for throughout the course of a semester or quarter. So you basically have to again, design around it because it does exist out there. And I think, like, to assume that students won't use it because you've said it's not allowed in your class is probably a false assumption, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're coming up on 2 years since ChatGPT dropped. And last year, I think, was when people started kind of wrapping their brains around it. But this year is when people have started taking meaningful steps forward. We're seeing that not just at UA, but across the board. We ran workshops last year. People were interested, very interested. The workshops went so well that we partnered with the UA Teaching Academy, who had more resources, because we said, hey, we want to scale this thing up. And the University of Alabama was very forward thinking about this as well. And it gave us the resources in partnering with the Teaching Academy. So we have a bigger workshop set up. We have, we're a lot bigger than we were last year. We sent out the call for applications. And on the first day, we got more than twice the available slots. I mean, the reception was insane. So a 40% increase just 1 year over year in terms of faculty who are using it. And our workshops are packed to the gills, and we have like a waiting list, and we're offering them as much as we can. So it does seem like the faculty interest definitely from the bottom up is considerable, which we're really happy with, because I think people have kind of demystified it, or there's just a recognition that this isn't a fad. Like, this isn't, something that's just going to go away. It's here. It's very much the new normal. So you can get ahead of it, or at the end of the day, you have to have some kind of response for it. And even if you don't want to be an expert in AI or even integrating it that much into your teaching, there's going to be, I think, a minimum level of exposure that anybody who considers themselves to be an educator is going to have within the next year or two.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, I definitely think that that is what we're starting to understand as time goes on is this is definitely something that's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And I really would hope that, Dr. Chu, you mentioned with, in technology, with people who are into web development, coding, that sort of thing, how, perhaps they're, some people have gotten replaced because maybe they haven't figured out how to use AI to make themselves that superhuman version of yourself that we mentioned earlier. One thing we've kind of heard, it's a little bit of a grim prediction. I just wanted to get your take on this, Dr. Chu, is that, one day in the future, there won't be a physical human being teaching a classroom full of students. Instead, it could be some sort of artificial intelligence program that is answering questions, fueling discussion, and handling a classroom just like your normal teacher would. Is that something that you could see taking place over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Well, It's anybody's guess, but give me your best guess.
Yes. Well, Michael, I will say it's already happening in some cases. Granted, this is limited use cases. There are schools in the UK, private schools, that are piloting these kinds of programs and selling the fact that they're using the latest technology and AI is going to come in and basically instruct their students. And then also, we've had some higher ed institutions basically piloting programs where TAs, teaching assistants, graduate teaching assistants, are now AI. Now, are those going to be successful? I would probably argue, and I imagine Lawrence would as well, that you can't necessarily replace that human element. Part of this, again, we're in early stages of this technology. There's a lot of optimism and perhaps hype around what this technology can do. And understandably, it's people, they're like kind of, there are fad phases. There's going to be a period of like a lot of investment into this, and then it's going to quiet down for a bit. And then it's going to probably just, kind of keep going in terms of the pace of development. So yes, that is a fear. And the reality of this, and this is a deep ethical issue, and why we're also very concerned about this from other vantage points societally, is that it's going to have impacts, right? Every technological revolution does, right? Think about industrialization, for example, that got rid of a whole sector of jobs, and it keeps going and going. And so that is why I think it's really important for educators to understand what the nature of this technology is, and to then be able to verbalize what it is that we offer that cannot be replaced by technology, right? That critical thinking capacity, that ability to offer guidance to AI development. I know, like, for the last few years, a lot of our colleagues in the humanities have really worried about the death of the humanities, and sort of all the threats that go towards funding, as well as the closure of programs in some cases. It's I would argue, and I think Lawrence would as well, that this is a great time for humanities to basically sell itself on what it provides in terms of, like, again, those critical thinking skills that are cultivated in departments like English, right, or modern languages, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess the idea now is, like, we constantly have to stay abreast of change. I think it's natural to fear change. I know I fear it, but I think also, like, learning is something that we try to instill in our students, and we also have to adopt lifelong learning and to realize that, like, we have to kind of see where change is going and then to stay ahead of it as best as we can. So I do really feel like there is always going to be a place for people. And I think, especially, even given where AI is right now, it is only going to get better. But I don't think it's still ever going to completely replace what it is that in-person instruction offers, or what the human instructor offers. So, being aware of what is happening with this technology is important, because I think there are points where we do want to push back. And we see other areas that are a bit concerning too, in terms of, like, the nature of the training data. And I know Lawrence can speak to privacy concerns, and other things that could have detrimental impacts. So the point is, I would say, to stay in connection with other educators. And that's part of what we've been doing these last 2 years, is just to develop wide networks, with Alabama institutions as well as external institutions as well, and to just continue doing this conversation and to stay ahead of the curve in terms of directing where we should be going societally with education and with AI.
Yeah, I also think that any class that's AI by itself is inherently going to be a worse class. Like, you're putting an inferior product on the table for your students, and it might be a cost-cutting measure. But in no way are there's no situation at the University of Alabama where AI is doing any of that kind of work. Like, it's against our policies. Instructors are the ones in the driver's seat here. We don't farm out stuff like that to AI. It's against our rules. But it's also important for people to remember that protection against automated decision making is actually like a fundamental right. It's something that exists, across the board, like in areas in global law, and it takes different forms. So a student being graded entirely by AI just off the bat is against civil law in certain places, and, like, would be against would be a lot of problems, both legally and just ethically. But forget ethics and morals and the law for a second. That's just the worst product. Like the best product that a university is going to put on the table for its students is going to be an expert who's a human being who is using AI in an expert manner to create the best possible learning experience, one that's really going to, hold people to a higher standards and teach their students to engage in multiple ways. As soon as you start taking the human element out of it, on top of the fact that, most of us would agree that that's wrong or unfair, it's also just, it's bad teaching. You're not getting the best possible product that you're going to be able to put on the table. So I think you might see some universities employing those things and private school employing those things, but they'll always be inferior to the institutions that are able to effectively combine first-rate instructors with this amazing technology behind them. And then they're superstars, right? They're creating these learning experiences that really just prepare their students and do the right thing. So both ethically and legally, it makes sense not to do that. But also then I think just from do you want to have good classes or not have good classes? Do you want to be known as a university that pushes it and, really, gets the most out of the learning experience or not?
No, it definitely seems like there's a lot of horizons here that have yet to be explored, and certainly that has to be, it's daunting, yes, but it has to be very exciting for a lot of these teachers who hopefully, after listening to this conversation, will have a little bit better idea of what this technology is, what it does, what it doesn't do, and just kind of how it is just another tool in their arsenal to do what they're already doing on a day-to-day basis. So again, Dr. Catherine Shu, Dr. Lawrence Capello, both from the University of Alabama. I'll wrap up our conversation there. It has been fantastic speaking to both of you. I appreciate both of your time, your insights, and I really will try and keep an eye on what you all are doing over there at UA, and hopefully myself keep tabs on what's going on with AI and how best to use it going forward. So thank you to both of you. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks. It was a lot of
Thank you,
fun.
Michael. And do keep in touch.
Oh, will do. There's so much to know and learn about AI, especially when it comes to its uses in the classroom. I truly hope this conversation has been helpful to you, our listeners. We really do encourage all AISA schools to take the time to have these conversations with their teachers and their students and find what works best for you when it comes to AI. By the way, you can find a link to the University of Alabama's Artificial Intelligence Teaching Enhancement Initiative by clicking on the link in the description of this episode. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And of course, keep an eye out for new episodes of Campus Conversations every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. And by the way, you can also watch the video version of this episode on our YouTube page. But for now, I'm your host, Michael Shipma. Thank you for listening.